Ladies and gentlemen, damas y caballeros, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, and thank you very, very much indeed for being with us today. I want to basically thank you in advance, not just for being here, but thank you for the comments and questions that you will give us later.
Estoy seguro que
For us,
tendrán
a
para
really
el
exciting
día de
moment
hoy.
because
Para
as some
nosotros
of
es
you
un
know, we've
momento muy
been talking
emocionante.
about this program for some time, and we're now at the moment of really getting quite close to implementation. But we still need your help. We need your thoughts and advice on what we are proposing, because you, from many different backgrounds, are the experts, and you know particularly about Mexico. I've had the pleasure and honor of learning about the education system in Mexico over the last 2 years, and knowing Mexico as a country for much longer. But as all of you know, a program like this is the sort of program that can't function without a group of allies and a group of real experts who are supporting the program and advising on the program. So this event is incredibly important for that point of view. So thank you for being here. And we have, I would really encourage you, and we have a session later of networking to get to know each other. We have representatives here from academia, industry, civil society, large organizations, small organizations. And I also should add that we are being joined via live stream by colleagues from the UK, and also from colleagues and friends from the UK, and also from other parts of Mexico. So yeah, please do get to know each other. I'm Dominic Gould. For those of you that don't know me, I basically lead on the Prosperity Fund Skills Program here in Mexico. And my colleague Rebecca Tron, who's visiting from London, is the head of the program globally across the 9 countries. So she's visiting all of the 9 countries in turn. And we've managed to get her here to Mexico today, and we're delighted that she's with us. And as you'll hear, I've been learning a lot from her this week. She used to work for Department for Education and has an incredible wealth of experience in developing education programs. So I think we're in very good hands with Rebecca. We also have a number of colleagues here in the room from the embassy. I'd just like them to sort of identify themselves, or I'll sort of identify them. So first of all, Tom George, Head of Global Issues. Thank you, Tom. The purpose of this is so that you know who to talk to if you have questions which I can't answer. We also have with us, and I'm very happy to have Julio Evaristo and Abril Ramos from our Department of International Trade. And a number of colleagues helping with the organization of this event who are also here to help. Laura Diaz, who's here in front. Thank you, Laura, for everything you've done. Guillermo Lara and Geraldine Loazea, who are outside helping with late arrivals. So without more ado, I think we should begin. And obviously, thank you again. I think the point of this event is really to tell you where we are, but then very much to listen to your comments and advice. So that would be my final point. So thank you in advance. Rebecca.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. It is a real honour to be with such wealth and experience and expertise in the room. Oh, I'm too short, that's the problem. Excited to be with such wealth and expertise in the room about the skills and education system in Mexico. As Dom said, my name is Rebecca Tron, and I lead the education skills work within the Prosperity Fund and the Foreign Office. So I cover all of our 9 programme countries, which I will run through shortly. I'm very conscious people are listening via stream and also having translations. So if I get excited and speak very quickly, I'm sorry, just flag and let me know, and I can slow down. So I'm also very conscious that people have questions around procurement and delivery partners. As you'll see in the invitation, the purpose today is to not talk about really procurement. Decisions about how delivery partners will be secured will be made after we have a clear set of requirements for each programme country, and the focus of today is really on sharpening our thinking and understanding about what those requirements should be for a programme in Mexico. So I also want to caveat what we discussed today in that what we're going to discuss is our current and iterative thinking about what a programme for Mexico could look like. But what you say today and the subsequent conversations we have with key stakeholders might shape that, and so this won't be a final set, so it comes with a bit of a health warning. I'm also very pleased to say that I know some of you will be familiar with this work already. Some of you might even be a bit of, oh God, not this again. This has been going on for a while. When things actually going to happen? Like, all understandable. Like Dom says, we're in a really exciting point now, and I'm very pleased to say that as of yesterday, our skills programme, so our 75 million programme, was actually approved. So we can actually now really move into implementation and focus on exactly what we want to do in each country. So this is a really exciting time, and I'm very grateful for all of you for helping us. So for those of you who haven't heard about the Prosperity Fund yet, I thought I'd do a brief overview. If this works. Oh, it does. So the Prosperity Fund is a £1.3 billion fund across government. It's using previous ODA funding, which is our kind of foreign aid budget, and it's investing in countries that we've not typically invested before. So whereas previously our foreign aid budget was largely focused in the poorest countries, now we're seeking to take some funding and invest in middle-income countries where we see the greatest potential for economic growth over the next 5 to 10 years, and investing in that to help ensure it. So the aim is to promote economic reform and the development needed for this growth. And while there are a number of bilateral programs as part of this fund, of which Mexico is a country that has a bilateral program, there are also a number of global programs. So the bilateral programs will be between the UK and Mexico, and will invest in a number of different themes, areas, energy, trade. There's also global programs which seek to address sort of systemic barriers and challenges to economic growth. And those will operate across a number of countries. So examples of our global programme include digital access, infrastructure, better health, and future cities, to name a few. And the most important one, obviously, is the Education and Skills programme, which is, our programme. That's just a bit of where we're investing and the countries that we're investing in. But as you can see, typically it's not the countries that we'd normally invest in as part of foreign aid. It's much more on the high potential countries for economic growth. So what is the Global Skills for Prosperity programme? So it is a £75 million programme that will run for 4 years until March 2023. The aim of the programme is to improve the affordability, quality, relevance and equity of higher education and technical and vocational education and training. So it's really quite focused on that tertiary level of education. It's looking at taking a partnership approach and drawing on expertise to promote sustainable and inclusive growth and poverty reduction. So I mentioned there are 9 countries involved. Those include Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, Nigeria, Kenya, Egypt, South Africa, Brazil, and most importantly, Mexico. So the programme is going to be split in kind of 2 key components and how it's structured. Because it's a global programme, we want to be more than the sum of our parts. We could easily kind of run an individual country programme across the 9, but we actually think this is an incredible opportunity to facilitate learning and best practice. So we will be seeking to develop a Great Britain education skills hub that will provide some of the technical expertise and programme management across all of the countries so that we can monitor, report, develop clear strategies for evaluation and learning, and look at more adaptive programming. So instead of just learning what works in one country and scaling up what works there, we can look at what works in a range of countries and share best practice. So quality, relevance, cost effectiveness and equity sound like very broad titles that might not mean that much. So we want to keep it open in terms of the interventions that we're looking for. And so some of the activities that might fall beneath that are still yet to be defined, but types of interventions that we would expect to see would include curricular development, leadership and teacher training, capacity building, work to look at English language, work to look at soft and non-technical skills, looking at partnerships, looking at technical assistance in terms of governance, financing, and looking at industry partnerships. So really quite a broad range of activity, but we want to deliberately keep it broad so that we can be focused on what the priorities and needs are for each individual country. So I've done our kind of theory of change, which, if anyone has ever worked with the Department for International Development before, is a key part of what we do. But it sort of breaks down how we expect our inputs and activity of this technical assistance to deliver against these 4 key pillars of quality, relevance, cost effectiveness and equity, and how ultimately our goal is for increased capacity for inclusive economic growth within Mexico. And with much further ado, I'll hand to the much more interesting part, which is actually what are we thinking about for Mexico? And for that, I'd like to hand over to Dominic to talk through some of our initial thinking. So a huge amount of work has already kind of gone on, and many of you have helped with that in terms of sharing your thoughts and expertise. And what we want to do today is test out what we're currently thinking and get your views on whether it seems sensible, whether it seems feasible. What do you think we need to be thinking about so that we can really make sure that we're targeting our investment well? Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Rebecca. So just to bring us up to date with what we've done already, we had the opportunity to do some scoping over the last year or so, and that previous global scoping, that was for all 9 countries, but with specific elements focused on Mexico, identified the high-level areas of technical and vocational education and training, or TVET, and English language training. And as a sort of also something that was noted as very important, higher education partnerships. And since that initial scoping, we've been able to do some more detailed country-specific scoping, and that has recently identified opportunities to develop projects focusing on the following areas, which again are quite broad, but in summary, skills development, education to industry partnerships, and these are all things that we've been hearing as we've traveled around the country and as we've worked with experts and listened to what you and others have been saying. Education industry partnerships have come out as absolutely key. Labour market intelligence, the 4th industrial revolution. We're obviously very conscious that what we do through this programme should not just be focused on helping the system work for now, but obviously for 20 years' time, 30 years' time, and so on. Information, advice and guidance for underemployed youth, and I think as many of you will agree, in Mexico we have some unemployment, but the major problem that we've identified is underemployment. English language for technicians, and STEM outreach programs. And as I said, all of those sort of priorities have arisen through various methods, but we have been traveling. We've luckily through this program had the opportunity to travel to a lot of states. I've mentioned some of them, but not all of them here. But you'll see that the states mentioned Chihuahua, Guanajuato, Jalisco, Nuevo León, Oaxaca, Querétaro, Sonora, and Veracruz are the ones we visited most recently. You'll see that there's quite an interesting spread of states there, states with very different profiles. And I think it's worth flagging that one of our ambitions for the programme is that we want to have impact in states, a number of different states with different sorts of profiles. And for example, we want at the end of the 4-year programme to have an evidence base of what has worked and what is successful, what has had most impact in states with those different profiles. So for example, if we had a project that was successful just in Nuevo León or just in Oaxaca, then the evidence base would not be as strong as if a similar program with adaptations had worked well in both. So that's why. We also are very keen to look at, for the same reason, to try to work across at least 2 industry sectors. So we've developed that thinking into 3 basic outputs at this stage, and remember as we go through in a moment the relevance, quality and equity points. And as you know, probably with outputs, and again, a feature of the way we do outputs in the UK is these are essentially things that we want to have achieved. So by the end of the programme, we want to have, first of all, facilitated effective education to employment partnerships at state level, prioritised to sectors key to Mexican national economic development. That last point is really important because obviously there are a number of industries that we could work in quite easily, but we really want to, with a limited resource, limited opportunity, we want to focus on the sectors which are the priority for Mexico's economic development over the next 20, 30 years. Output 2, we want to have developed, by the end of the program, an enabling environment for a strong skills ecosystem through technical assistance and capacity building. So whereas you might say that output 1 is around really identifying what sectors we'll work in, identifying where we'll work, and then trying to create the network and the communication between the different players and actors in the education to employment constellation or panorama. Output 2 is to make sure that the individual components of those networks are sufficiently capacitated, sufficiently trained, sufficiently knowledgeable, and sufficiently empowered to make that happen to maximum impact, to make that communication really work. And then output 3, which is incredibly important for this program, as you've already heard from Rebecca, is we want to, by the end of the program, we want to have improved access and opportunities for unemployed and underemployed youth. And obviously, I think all of us here know the inequality that exists in parts of Mexico, and it's incredibly important for us that through this program we do reach people and communities who are really completely outside the system at this point. So that's an incredibly important output that we need to have achieved. So as Rebecca's mentioned, we would be outlining requirements and budgets at a high level when we secure delivery partners, but it's again important to stress that at the beginning of the 4-year program, there'll be a 4 to 6 month inception period. So that allows us some flexibility and adaptive programming to make sure that as we move towards implementation phase, we're not going straight from planning to doing. We actually have that flexibility to see if what we've planned is working. So that by the time we start the full program, we've really been effective in narrowing down of the many things that we could do, which will have most impact. So that inception period will allow us to work with delivery partners to map the needs and priorities, and upon the completion of inception, agree detailed milestones, targets, and budgets for the program lifetime. So if we now try to go back to our theory of change, this is the draft, and this is draft, which is an important point to mention because we want your ideas, but this is the version of the theory of change for Mexico. And there you'll see, and don't worry, on the next slide, you'll see in slightly larger text the inputs or activities that are at the bottom of this table. But you'll see those 3 outputs in the middle section there. And you'll see how they fit into equity, equality, and relevance. Now, that doesn't mean that we have forgotten about cost effectiveness. For us, it's incredibly important that the evidence base that we generate through this program will be influential and, how should we say, attractive to policymakers and decision makers. So it's very important for us that whatever we do demonstrates a model which is cost effective and which is scalable, which can be replicated in other states and other places. So cost effectiveness is just because it's not here doesn't mean that it's out of our minds. It's very important indeed. And you'll see at the top there, worth stressing again, this impact, which we must have through the program, increased capacity for inclusive economic growth in Mexico due to more productive and equitable skills sectors, improving employability, employment opportunities, and the earning potential of beneficiaries. So that takes us back, that keeps us focused on that overarching objective to improve, to stimulate economic growth, but inclusive economic growth in Mexico. So if we quickly move to the indicative activities for the first output, we are, for example, looking at feasibility or regional pilot study into the effective and efficient use of labour market intelligence. Now, what we found, and we'd be interested to know your views, what we found as we've talked to people is that quite a lot of labour market intelligence actually exists in Mexico, and the problem is the coordination of it and the effective and efficient use of it, rather than a situation where no one is generating this data. We find that lots of people in their different responsibilities are generating this data, and it's a question of coordination and, as I say, effective use of it. Then, for example, a skills need gap assessment to identify and confirm the priority sectors and industries for the program focus. And we've already had certain suggestions around rail, automotive, and fourth industrial revolution industries, including digital technology and smart manufacturing. Again, we would welcome your thoughts. And again, it's important to note as we go through these that to take you back to that point about the inception phase. So some of these activities you will see are more naturally placed during a 4 to 6 month inception phase, and then subsequent ones will begin to happen during the implementation phase. The third one is incredibly important: partnerships with key industries, educational and training institutions, both higher education and TVET, and local stakeholders. Again, as we've travelled around, we've seen some extraordinary examples of good practice in cluster formations and organisations working together, taking matters into their own hands. But in other parts of the country, much less of that is happening. And so we feel that it's a really good opportunity. This program is a really good opportunity to share best practice, and it's again, I should mention, it's something we've been working very hard on in the UK, so that's another reason why we think that sharing our good and bad experiences in these areas could be helpful. The fourth one, also really important, they're all really important, gender assessment and outreach priorities in identified sectors. So we'll talk a little bit later in more detail about gender and social inclusion, but it's important to identify that in each of these three outputs, the activities that we will do will include significant elements of a focus on gender and social inclusion. So review existing standards, assess options for enhancement or development of new occupational standards would be another potential activity. Review the training needs in non-technical skills. And again, this is something we've found as we've travelled around and listened to colleagues working in the education to employment sphere. Cognitive skills, competence skills, language skills, and what are known as basic skills. There are many different terms for this. Element, but I think a lot of people have told us, a lot of students, a lot of teachers, a lot of employers particularly have told us that those are the skills which are, make oil the wheels, we might say, but I think we had an excellent phrase in a conference in Wilton Park, which is you get hired for your hard skills, fired for your lack of soft skills, and I think that's quite an interesting comment which we've heard in different forms in our visits in Mexico. Then an activity around developing and delivering new or enhanced curricula. Enhanced is very important. Again, I should say that many of the conversations we've had have made it clear that there's a lot of good practice already happening here in Mexico, a lot of existing materials, a lot of existing relationships. So we certainly don't want to reinvent the wheel, or how do we say it in Spanish, redescubrir el fuego. We want to build on what already exists and make it stronger and more effective. So yes, curricula, knowledge products, and training models in the sectors of industry that we've identified. English language, again, something that we hear constantly, and I must emphasize that this is not an excuse for me not to learn Spanish, but I do think that it's very important, and we do hear from employers particularly that the ability to have English language, whether it's to be able to interpret industry manuals or other sort of literature relating to training on a job, but also the opportunity for to work for international companies for young Mexicans is significantly enhanced by an English language element. So it's very important for us. And as you've seen, that's an element that's come all the way through from the very early scoping that we did until now. And then, of course, certification and the international recognition of qualifications within the identified sectors. And that's absolutely key because, again, what we want to achieve through this program is mobility. We want students to be able to, and young people to be able to move between industries, move between companies within that industry. If we're equipping through this program, if we're equipping people to do a very good job and be very successful with one company or one industry, then we're not really making them mobile. We're not really helping them long term, particularly when we think about the fourth industrial revolution and the potential changes to industry, the politics around certain industries, the relationships, and so on. So mobility is an important sort of cross-cutting theme that we want to achieve through the program. Moving on to output 2, and I'm going to speed up a little bit because I want plenty of time for you to tell us what you think. So this is the one around developing an enabling environment for a strong skills ecosystem. And the potential activities would be, first of all, of course, maybe in the inception phase, to review the roles, the responsibilities, the capacity and the capability for the effective delivery and coordination of TVET and higher education. Determining the priorities for technical assistance. Safeguarding, very important to mention. This program is obviously going to be working with young people, and it's a particular issue for us, and I know for some of your organizations, that we are making sure that in the course of building up this program, we are making sure that we're also enhancing and supporting the protection of vulnerable kids and young people. So our perception is that some organizations, some companies have quite good procedures in those areas, and others simply don't. And so that's an area where we want to, which I want to flag. Then the delivery of the technical assistance, leadership training and coaching for TVET and HE leaders, and that could be technical, behavioral, and cultural. And again, leadership is another theme that we've heard constantly as we've been traveling around and listening to experts and people working in the sector. Systems might be set up to some extent, but what is really required is some inspirational leadership and senior level buy-in to these systems to make them really work. Delivery of teacher-instructor training. Technical assistance to the local governance of TVET and higher education to support the development of improved regulation and strategies and priorities, and that starts to push in towards the theme of sustainability and the importance of making sure that these projects and these programs are not just successful in themselves, but they actually lead to policy change and things that will continue as structures and programs that will continue after the end of the program. Gender sensitivity training, so all the actors involved in this ecosystem, and enabling the sharing of best practice, supporting peer development and learning. Again, our scoping has proved that there are a number of very good examples of organizations and industry and education working together, so we want to share that. And I'm also interested to know what you might think about how that might work across state borders, because again, if we can't work everywhere, what we would like to be able to do is to have successful programs in certain states, but to find mechanisms whereby those the learnings from those projects can be brought across to other states and implemented in other states. And then output 3, which is the equity one, about improved access and opportunities for unemployed and underemployed youth. And these activities could include behavioral insights research, and this actually speaks to one of the issues that we've been working on in the UK as well, which is the perception of technical education, a relatively negative perception of technical education compared to academic traditional higher education and apprenticeships. And obviously, as many of you here know, the job opportunities and fulfillment opportunities of a technical education are really very substantial, and but a lot of people might not really realize that, and so I think that's an important aspect of our program. Information, advice and guidance resources for unemployed and underemployed youth, so same sort of theme, really helping connect people who might not even know what they want to do, who might not even know what opportunities exist, to make them aware of those opportunities and empower them to apply meaningfully for those opportunities. And I've heard some incredible stories recently about, I feel in a very privileged position because I've been taught from practically the year I was born to how to prepare for an interview, how to present at an event, how to basically apply for things, and a lot of people simply don't have that. So we're very conscious of that, and we want to address that through this program. And then technical assistance to improve the access of marginalized groups to higher education and TVET. So I don't have any way of telling the time with me. 1 minute, as I'm 1 minute late, 1 minute over, so I'm going to stop immediately and ask you to help us answer these questions. What reactions do you have to the proposed interventions outlined? Do these interventions seem sensible and feasible? Does it align with your understanding of the priorities and challenges facing Mexico's TVET and higher education system? Is there anything we have missed, anything that isn't here that we should be thinking about? And how can we ensure that all of this is effective and sustainable? So I'm going to ask Rebecca to join me here so that we can answer your questions. And we will also potentially have a number of questions from our friends watching from other parts of the country. And Laura will bring those to us when we have them. Great.
A lot of information there.
A lot of information. So we'll have to speak. Yeah,
Yeah,
we'll just
sorry.
do turns. Yeah.
No, just say, yeah, a lot of information there. So I feel you may feel like you've been hit with a wall of information there because there's a huge amount in there to digest. But yeah, if anyone had kind of questions, thoughts, comments, reflections, and it'd be really helpful if you could say who you are and what organisation you're from when you begin. Oh, sorry.
Thanks. Kevin Mackenzie, British Council. To what extent do you think the Prosperity Fund could be used to support any Mexican government initiatives? I'm thinking in particular about Output 3 and, say, Jóvenes Construyendo el Futuro, for example.
So yeah, it's a really, really important point, and obviously, as the UK government, it's our first base has to be that we're working with national and state authorities, and we're excited, frankly, that the focus of the new government is very much on social development, and we've heard that a lot recently from the minister himself and from others. And so, with respect to supporting individual programs, I think absolutely it's something we would be looking at, and we're talking regularly to the national government about that. I think that where the UK has an opportunity, the UK in terms of the convening power and the resources that we can bring to this program, it is exactly in supporting, where requested, the success of programs like that, and advising some of the things that we've done which might not have worked so well, and other things that we have done which have succeeded. So yeah, we're entirely, we want this program to be supportive of those priorities and of those sorts of programs. Obviously we would evaluate each opportunity as it comes. But yeah, I mean, any program like that has so many challenges, and no doubt, precisely for that reason, we're having our own inception phase to see what works and what doesn't. So it's exactly in that moment of those sorts of programs that we feel we can be helpful.
Thank you, Rosalia Valero, Cambridge Assessment English. Slide 4, the top rectangle. There's education program, brackets to be confirmed, and then the list of countries. What needs to be confirmed there?
Yeah, that's a very old map. There's nothing to be confirmed.
Okay, so it
that's
is
a map
confirmed.
from about, I think, over a year ago. So it is confirmed, the programme now, and approved.
Thank you.
Hi there, Tom Scott from Conversari. My question is, you mentioned the word impact, both of you, a number of times. What key indicators would the UK government be using in terms of measuring impact of a successful programme? Is it financial, economic, is it social? What indicators have been used in that?
If anyone's, we have kind of with our programmes, we have something called a results framework, and aligned with our theory of change, which sets out our logical framework of if we're trying to see increased capacity for inclusive economic growth, what are the different stages and subcomponents that we can do to do that, and obviously it gets smaller and smaller the lower we go down. And so for each stage of a theory of change model, we have potential indicators and potential time and milestones. So you would have indicators of both kind of effectiveness and efficiency. So if it was, largely it will depend on what you're doing. So you have indicators about how many people were reached, how effective was it, what was the quality of it, what sort of impact did it have, and then you move kind of up to your different levels in terms of looking at improved employment rates and looking, ultimately at the impact level. It's such a huge one. You ultimately start looking at some of the sustainable development goals indicators for that. So a lot of those are not achievable in a program lifetime, but they're things that we align to show how we situate what we're doing within a broader conceptual framework of international development and skills. But yeah, we would have results frameworks around that sort of impact and effectiveness in regards to what we're trying to achieve socially, and then we'd additionally have kind of key indicators around performance and financial effectiveness and efficiency as well. But it would all be decided as well post-inception phase when we knew exactly what we were doing. And so it would be done in partnership with who we were delivering with, because you wouldn't want someone to be held against something that they didn't have a role in shaping as being feasible.
Hello, my name is Luis Ramos from PA Consulting. We are engaged with the Prosperity Fund in the anti-corruption program here in Mexico. Our program has an important objective about sustainability, long-term sustainability. We are talking about a change of culture. We are talking about training also of specific institutions. And we see the same in many of the other programs. So we are working strongly now in the energy reform. And one of the main challenges is about training, about changing the way people analyzes business, looks to the future, builds strategies, and transforms the big companies like CFE or like Pemex. And I have to say that the cultural reluctancy to change and the lack of knowledge of basic elements of the new market is critical for that transformation. I guess that the other program, the energy program, has several similar challenges. It will be the same with the financial services. Probably you heard these days that there is an initiative to bring on mobiles a barcode system for payments in Mexico, in the tianguis, in the small shops, because I think it's about 80% of the population is unbanked. So that needs to be also trained, that needs to become something usual to the population that is not used to this. So we are talking about, I guess, crossing the needs of several of the programs that are already running and the training, the global training and education program. So one of my suggestions would be to really build together and engage, bring these connection points and define specific common targets and work streams so we can get synergies from one and another. And the second element I think that is very important in Mexico is the key tractors, the big companies, the big corporations. So we talked about Pemex or CFE, that it should be, but there are others like PepsiCo or like Cemex or like many other big conglomerations that they take care also of the education, and they are somehow universities linked to business. I think those are key actors that should be engaged. There's so many ideas that are crossing my mind that I see huge opportunity. I don't know if you have heard about the health train that was promoted by Grupo México to go around the country and giving healthcare services for free to the population and moving. It's a hospital on a train that goes along the country. It requires also people to be ready to accept that and change the traditional way of receiving. So the education is critical for so many things. Also in the health system, there is a need to create a standard to evaluate all the healthcare institutions in Mexico. There is no one trained for that. There is a huge need of training to be able to standardize a high-level service in healthcare, so that can go all the way down to the population at the end of the day. So I think we should be talking about leveraging what we have with several of the Prosperity Fund programs, and also with other Mexican big stakeholders that some of them are not institutional, that are critical in the education arena. That's my sharing with you.
Yeah, no, so thank you so much for that. I mean, so we work quite close with the other programs, both kind of in Mexico and globally, and we're always looking for ways to find synergies where we can build off each other and leverage what we're doing to kind of achieve more than the sum of our parts. So I really appreciate that, and definitely noted healthcare as one of the sectors that we should be looking in. And people like Dom here are really critical in making sure we're kind of pulling those links together. No pressure or anything, but so thank you so much.
Yes, hello. Estera Barbarossa with DAI. We're also a Prosperity Fund partner in energy and financial inclusion. Thank you for the presentation. And I was wondering around Output 3, I've seen with the Global Prosperity Fund for Skills, a focus on affordability to higher education. And so I was curious if you're still exploring mechanisms around scholarships or other sort of financial mechanisms to make university or vocational training more affordable for students who might be coming from low-income households. And if you're aware of current initiatives in the government or state governments around scholarships or other financial mechanisms.
Do you want to?
Do you want to start?
So as you spoke, as Dom said earlier, cost effectiveness wasn't pulled out of a strand, but it's something that's underlying a lot of what we're doing. And actually, our quality pillar we kind of debated about whether it should be a quality pillar or a cost effectiveness enabling environment pillar, and it kind of cuts across both. I think it's really a key part of making sure that high quality technical education, higher education is accessible, is making sure that it is cost effective. Primarily it's a technical assistance program, so in terms of scholarships, that's something that we probably wouldn't be considering purely because of the amount of funds we have and the focus on technical assistance. But looking at things like how do you provide technical assistance to make the systems more cost effective is definitely something that I think we should be considering. Do you want to add anything about Mexico specifically?
Yeah, thanks very much, because obviously it's a very specific practical barrier to what we want to happening. So it's a really good point. I think it's in addition to what Rebecca said, we are aware of certain models of that, and to the extent that we're looking to connect and coordinate and share best practice, that could well be within scope to where that might be working in certain parts of the country, to show how that is working to other parts of the country. And I would add, of course, as we know, most people I think know, one of the biggest barriers is even where the cost of education is quite low, the loss of income that people could be having instead of working is the barrier. So we would be basically potentially around in the information, advice and guidance and some of the labour market intelligence elements of the programme, essentially looking at ways of sort of making that economic argument in an understandable way so that people can see that, yes, they'll take a hit in the short term, or they'll potentially lose some income, but long term their potential to earn and support family and have their own family and be fulfilled professionally and personally is actually much greater. So, yes.
Hi, Ana from Enseña por México, Teach for Mexico. Just thinking about how to prepare the youth for this kind of programs, I'm thinking of social-emotional skills, and I don't see it here. I don't know if it's considered or how to, because from education NGOs, it's something that we're working on, because the youth, it's more about the professional skills and the entrepreneurial skills have to go alongside social-emotional skills, developing that and strengthening, because if not, the youth won't be ready to accept these skills or to be a permanent, just keeping the skills a permanent thing. So how are you considering this other factor? It's the most, like, the not tangible factor of the program.
So we think that's a really key part of what we're doing. And when we talk about skills, I think we actually conceptualize quite a broad definition of skills. So much like the kind of the UN definition, we have the technical elements, but we also have socio-emotional and cognitive, basic and financial skills, digital literacy skills. It's all part of a kind of, when we say skills, it's all part of a broader package. And we think it is really crucial. Like Dom said, we hear people say they get hired for their technical skills and fired for their lack of soft skills or social-emotional skills. And I think it is part of one of them, but we probably didn't pull it out clear enough. But when we say skills, it's a huge part, and we definitely recognise the importance of that.
Hi, my name's Nicola Humphreys. I'm from Wiz Education. We've been working for several years with Ministries of Education here in Mexico. And I met with the Ministry of Education, or Secretary for Education of La Scala on Tuesday, and found out that of all the children that go to primary school, there's only 3% that actually make it to university. So all those kids that are dropping out along the way, how are you considering those? Kind of a follow-on, actually, from the last question, because the youth that you're building up into that program, how are you not having, avoiding the sort of things repeating again and again after the Prosperity Fund is gone, basically.
Hello. Oh, sorry.
So what was quite specific about this programme, and one of the reasons it was in development for so long, was that originally it was a very broad education skills programme, and we looked at primary and secondary and tertiary, and looking at what we could do across all of the, I think we have at that point we're looking at potentially 14 countries. And what happened was it was really hard to build a programme around that because there was so many different things you could do. The scope was so broad, it was really hard to find a kind of commonality. And ultimately we ended up having to rescope and narrow down into this focus on tertiary. And because of the countries we were in, typically our focus on international development and education has been on really looking solely at primary and secondary and that first 12 years of education, and addressing the challenges. But given the countries that we're working in, a lot of what we're hearing is that that isn't what the main cause is. It's around how we're translating that into employment, and that's why we have that focus. That being said, foundational skills and basic skills are a huge challenge, and particularly when we're talking about access for marginalised groups, it's what we're seeing as one of the fundamental challenges. And again, when we speak about skills, I think ensuring basic skills and basic financial skills, literacy skills, are a huge part of what we need to be doing to make sure we're supporting that and improving that system. But yeah, it's a bit of a challenge really, because there is so much to do and we want to help, but we have to also target what we're doing. But I don't know if we want to speak about particularly Mexico.
Yes, I mean, it's a really good question. We'd love to do everything, of course. But I think to the extent that we want to have an impact on all levels of education, I think it could be said that by improving and strengthening the offer of higher education and technical vocational training here, by basically, if we talk about line of sight all the way through education to employment, then I think one of the things I've noticed is that talking with people maybe whose older brothers have gone through a higher education scenario and then not had a job afterwards and so on. I think if we can, by strengthening through this program those sectors, we hope to provide a sort of a line of sight for kids in at a lower level of education to get through. I think that's really if we're raising ambitions, we want to make sure that that's for something that is really strong and really will create an earning potential for those people in the future. Does that?
Hello. I'll say this in Spanish because I think it's very complex for the whole content it contains. Okay. Soy León López de Accede Educación.
My name is Leon Lopez from Accede Educación. We give educational financing on soft skill and hard skills. And what we have learned throughout our very short experience is that the educational system in Mexico hasn't developed the skills and capabilities the labor market requires today. So out of everything we'll learn in this presentation, I can summarize it in a cycle. This must be regarded as a cycle in which we identify the needs, and then we take it from institutions like SIDAC, which are institutions that have been making the effort of analyzing and identifying the weak spots, the needs, weak spots on behalf of the students, the alumni, both public and private sectors. There is a huge need for these skills and capabilities, and on the other hand there are some clear needs identified by the entrepreneurial sector as to the candidates they get. In other words, universities are sending candidates that do not have enough capabilities for the private sector. Having said so, I believe that we need to look for a way to come together with these organizations to approach companies dedicated to positioning people in the labor market. I don't know, massive pages like Indeed, OCC, like the big labor marketplace web pages. That is on the one hand, and on the other hand, we need to work on the programs brought on by the government, like Jóvenes Construyendo program, where they try to find a way to give more jobs to students, but on the other hand, the entrepreneurial sector sees a tax benefit to some extent. How much of a tax benefit can a huge company like Mexico could have? Maybe hiring 2 or 3 employees would be more of a social impact. So again, the effort has to be bigger. The effort needs to be focused on putting together the government policies and the allocation of new talents to companies to foster the tax benefit that at the end of the day we know it is the main driver of the private sector interests. But we also need to have alliances with agencies training students. There are different agencies that have died when trying to foster programs like this program, the development of skills, and it is not limited to primary school or secondary school. There is a sector, for example, in the energy sector or in the manufacturing sector. There are workshops being given in Europe and Asia where families are certified or people with experience get certified in specialized welding that the energy sector requires. And we don't have that in Mexico today. So there is no acknowledgement either. We need to rescue all of the companies that have tried to create the effort and have failed, because they haven't managed to get it to the right sector, maybe because there are hurdles in the entrepreneurial public sectors. We don't know that, but what we do know is that they have tried to train people and the training has not been there, and for these endeavors in Mexico, people have brought in international specialists to carry out the work. So being able to take specialization and training, it's not only a task for the youth. The benefit must be extended to productive sectors. States with booming economic development. Querétaro is a state whose activity has been very important to the manufacturing sector. We have in Tabasco the energy sector. We hear a lot about the refinery, and you may agree or not, but this is a developing sector. And in the same vein, the southeast, the touristic areas, people must speak English, because people do not speak English. People don't have enough knowledge. We need to look for a way. We need to forge the right alliances to do so. So, to all intents and purposes, I think that in order to ensure the future of this program, we must have the support of the government, on the one hand, practices and policies they are putting together, and on the other hand, forging alliances with different participants and trade companies, so that companies can get certified and can take advantage of the benefits, so that they truly train people and they just don't get the youngsters getting the copies, getting the coffees, because it is easier to get a youngster from Construye por Mexico instead of hiring an actual driver or having a messenger, whatever. So that can only be achieved through alliances. As an institution, what we can contribute with we have developed a series of contacts and alliances at a national and international level. We can bring them to the table. Same thing with headhunter agencies, with some editorial companies. They all have training programs, certification programs, and are fostering this. We have a database of clients that have gone outside the country to improve their capacities and skills. We have a database. So, well, I've spoken enough. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That was a very useful comment. And yes, I agree. It is about forging alliances, working with chambers and companies. That is within the scope of the program. It's always been in our intention. Thank you very much. Creo que tenemos tiempo para otra intervención y después seguimos con la conversación después de la siguiente sesión.
Buenas tardes a todos. Bueno, primero, antes que nada, muchas gracias por
Good afternoon. First of all, thank you for having me here, for inviting me to this working session. The truth is there are a lot of thoughts spinning in my head. I am definitely excited about this Prosperity Fund program. I didn't know it. Sorry, I didn't say who am I. I come from a civil society organization. It's called Mano Amiga, a social work by a NAWAC. And what we offer is education for kids with less opportunities. My change model is based on providing education from kindergarten to high school. But it is true, yeah, I have some success cases where kids manage to have good social mobility, the folks from Mano Amiga. But out of the 14,000 students I have, perhaps it is half of them, if that. Nevertheless, I think these type of projects have to be aligned with companies and civil society organizations to get to achieve a higher impact. It is hard to work with the government, especially here in Mexico, where projects go every 6 years because every new administration, they start from scratch. So this is a good opportunity to sit and think, what can we do with this human capital that I have, that are highly trained, highly educated, that can really align to the needs of companies in Mexico. Just like I heard before, it is important to have an alliance, to know the needs of companies, for example, British companies. This is my comment. We still have a long way to go, but we could have a good alliance between private sector and civil society organization. I'm going to give you an example. We are working with the Anglo Institute to train our teachers and our students on English language so that all students have an excellent English language, and children from other areas of the population that wouldn't have access to these opportunities if it weren't for this initiative. Thank you, yeah, we agree, and we will take note of your comments. I think we have another comment there with Jorge.
Thank you very much. My name is Jorge Barragán.
Gracias, mi nombre es Jorge Barragán. Yo soy director nacional de una fundación. Somos una fundación especializada en disponibilidad de trabajo. Tenemos 30 años de experiencia en todo el mundo y sobre todo en México.
And we have worked trying to build up workforce development strategies, partnering with government and also the private sector. And I think that, well, my initial reaction is that clearly the UK Prosperity Fund has done the homework quite well so far, because I see a very robust and compelling theory of change. I think you have asked the right questions about the problem, and you can see 3 strong pillars throughout the outcomes with very relevant activities. I think that in terms of the vision, I would like to outline that I agree with you that the program should be aligned with a vision of economic development in Mexico. That's the first part. We need to have a clear vision to really orient the effort. Number 2, I celebrate with you that you have a sectorial focus. It's very complex to develop workforce thinking in every sector, in every place. and it should be demand-driven, right? We need to focus on specific skills that are marketable in a specific regional market. Also, I celebrate that you are open to a focus about working bottom-up interventions and not only top-to-bottom. When you say that you are going to work with government in coordination with fellow authorities, I think that this specific focus has not been essay with method and budget in the last 20 years in Mexico, and I think that there are some good experiences we can learn from specific universities or colleges that can be, once you prove that these innovations are possible at that level, then you can design better public policy and not always the opposite, right? I see some challenges, but most in the deployment side, of course, right? When I read your theory of change, we are talking about securing change in universities, right? We're talking about system change. And this required a specific method of program management, of giving technical assistance. And this required time and understanding incentives. Why are not universities with this institutional design, with this budget, are working to close the skills gap, right? I think that in that order, in deployment, there will be need a lot of consultancy, trying to understand these incentives and try to overcome them in a way that the problem could be sustainable throughout time. The other challenge is complexity. I imagine that you are thinking about a collection of these activities together in one program in one university, right? And right there, I think that capital seed and technical assistance is going to be the currency that allows to prove and stress test the system to see the cracks after you try an innovation and then try to fix that to make sure that it's sustainable throughout time. The other thing is that there's a component regarding collaboration between universities and the private sector. And that's a collective action problem. It's not easy to collaborate. It's not easy to collaborate even inside one organization. And I heard somebody that says that schools are from Venus and firms are from Mars, right? You need a Rosetta Stone right there. You need an honest broker and staff time dedicated in order to cure an agenda, to really leverage the knowledge of the private sector, translate them in relevant skills, and then see how methods and mechanisms you have to bring those skills in specific learning objectives in a curricular way, right? Just to mention something, maybe thinking in the deployment, one thing I kind of see lacking here is the voice of youth. I think that youth agency, it's an important piece of this puzzle. We need to hear them. We need to understand their own incentives. They not always want to work in manufacture. They not always want to work in retail, right? And this opportunity to build up a workforce strategy for a country with a sense of future and the future of Mexico will need necessary to engage the desire of youth in the equation. Thank you, and sorry if I took too long.
Thank you very much, Jorge. That was extremely helpful, and we've noted all your comments. I think so. We're slightly running out of time, so I have a problem and a solution. The solution, I'll do a solution first. We need the solution is that we have time after the final session, of course, for networking, but it's not just networking. Laura Diaz, my colleague here, will be wandering around with a notebook, and she'll be taking down any questions that people want to have sort of more formally recorded and answered than would be done simply through a chat with us on the terrace, but both are welcome. So, and we will also take notes of your questions. And our plan is to publish those questions without saying who they're from, but to publish the questions and answers afterwards. So this is the start of a conversation, so we will continue. So that is true. The problem, which is not a problem in the real sense, that we also have to talk about, and it's very important for us to talk about gender and social inclusion, and we should probably start doing that now, otherwise we'll run out of time. So thank you very much for your comments so far. We'll continue the conversation, and I will hand over to Rebecca on that particular topic.
So, thank you so much for your comments there. It's really useful, and it's really great to get your feedback, and particularly noted key things about alignment with industry, around alignment with government, and that's a really big part of what we see as the vision for the Output 1 with the industry engagements, but in a way that we can do in a focus managed way, and also the alignment with government and their priorities, and ensuring that we make change sustainable. And that again is a really big part of Output 2, which is around creating the enabling environment and skills ecosystem. So thank you so much, and especially youth dialogue. I always kind of kick myself, because I know that actually we talk about education skills and young people without talking to young people, and it always kind of frustrates me that we always think of it as an afterthought. So thank you, and we're definitely going to address that. So as I said at the beginning, this programme is a ODA funded programme, so it's Official Development Assistance, which is kind of British foreign aid money. And we have very strict legal requirements around how we spend that money to ensure that it's being spent appropriately. Fundamentally, ODA funds have to be used to support poverty reduction and inclusive economic growth. And we have very strict requirements about how we do that. And it is also very much at the heart of what we do. So our funds come under what's called our Gender Equality Act in 2014, which means we legally have to be mindful and give consideration to how our actions affect not only women, but women in marginalised groups. But this is also very much underpinned by our policy thinking and our priorities. And so we have our gender inequality policy, we have our UK AIDS strategy, and we have our economic development strategy that all reiterate the importance of supporting gender and social inclusion in everything that we're doing. So as a minimum, we have to be mindful of what we're doing. But our ambition is very much beyond that. And so when I talk about kind of gender and social inclusion, broadly within the framework that we think about it kind of falls into three categories. So there's what's called the minimum compliance level with the Gender and Inclusion Act, which is that we think through the risks of what we're doing and we put in appropriate measures. So we consider safeguarding, we look at whether we are actually doing any harm. Is what we're doing exacerbating existing inequality or promoting stereotypes? We look at aspects such as modern slavery and harassment, and ensuring that we are taking appropriate steps to avoid that. However, our ambition is much greater than that. It is for both empowerment and transformation. And when we look at empowerment and gender and social inclusion, what we mean is, are women and marginalised groups directly benefiting from what we're doing? So are we increasing access to assets, resources, skills and knowledge for women and marginalised groups? And what we strive for in our international development work and in the partnerships that you have is for transformative change. And that's something that sounds very easy in practice, is very easy to say, but incredibly difficult in practice. And whilst we often set the ambition for transformative change, that usually is something that can only be realised quite far down the line if you see really effective, sustainable improvement. So even if we set our aim there, often in the short term, we really can only see empowerment in what we're doing. But transformative gender and social inclusion really lies on tackling the systemic barriers to inequality and looking at how you change that through policies, regulations and strategies to change the entire environment. So it's quite a big ask. But what we seek to do is really put that at the heart of our ambition, even from the design stage, and then something that we monitor and assess and adapt towards all the way through programme design. So we had, when we started, our kind of 4 pillars of quality, relevance, cost effectiveness and equity. And whilst equity sort of seems one that leans directly towards it. It's important to say that supporting gender and inclusion cuts through across all of our intervention is something that we'll be looking at. So we've done some work already in Mexico and across all of our countries to baseline gender and social inclusion, looking at global indicators, but also through field visits in countries, talking to stakeholders and understanding what sits beneath that, what are the actual challenges, opportunities, entry points, and barriers that limit women and marginalised groups access to higher education, technical vocational education, also the quality of their provision, and crucially how that translates to education to employment process. So we've looked through some of that and thought about how could we build that into our programme design right from the outset, and some of the options that we have been considering include disaggregated targets and indicators. And this is very much, again, part of our kind of basic compliance, what we would seek to do so that we can actually assess the impact that we're having. Targeting states with greater socioeconomic need for project interventions, so looking at the demographics of a particular state and looking at how do we target our interventions there, how could we pilot things there. Obviously that comes with increased challenges in terms of delivery, but we think that those challenges are worth it to make sure that we're really trying to reach the right people. Integrating gender and social inclusion within industry sector analysis. So when we're looking at which sectors might we want to focus on, making sure we're looking at particularly gender and social inclusion within those sectors. Integrating gender and social inclusion analysis into our behavioural insights research. So if we're looking at how do we best promote technical and vocational education training, higher education to marginalised groups, making sure that that is built in there in a really robust evidence-led way. Supporting capacity building of institutions to promote inclusive learning environment, including, for instance, looking at gender sensitivity training at institutional local level, technical assistance with specific gender inclusion components, and encouraging best practice in gender and social inclusion as a peer development area, and a specific stream of activities targeted at underemployed youth to improve information and facilitate increased access to skills development opportunities. And that's kind of the output 3 that we were talking about. But these are only some ideas that we've had of how we could do this. We really want to situate this right in the central heart of our thinking and in what we want to try and achieve. But we realise it's a very complex challenge with a number of different dimensions to it. So these were some of the ideas we had, but we'd really welcome your thoughts on whether these seem sensible, whether there are other things that we need to be thinking about, or any reflections that you have on gender and social inclusion in TVET and HE in Mexico. I'm going to open up for any questions, comments. No. Broadly speaking, do these seem... Oh, thank you. Okay.
Second, Roberta, we'll just get you a microphone so that everybody can hear the... 1 second.
Yeah. Oh. 1 second. At least an alarm didn't go off then, that could have been quite bad.
Roberta, why don't you ask your question? We can all hear and we'll publish that later so that those online can hear. So go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, it seems appropriate to me that those are key elements to as a baseline to discuss and to move forward. Thank you. I think that something that needs to perhaps that might be added there, and then of course since I represent the OECD and we have our own work on that, it's about the link between, so let's see, and so I think that it might, would it be possible to include the notion of the STEM education, because I don't see it there. STEM, especially in Mexico, for example, is STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. Yeah. Is the set of areas where more women should be included, because especially in Mexico, those are the professions, the STEM professions, that offer the better salaries, better career opportunities. it has also a multiplying effect. If you see a girl transitioning into a STEM-related career, it's more likely that she stays in the formal sector of the economy, and that's really important for Mexico. And also, it also adds up to the family circle, and that's something that's been discussed for girls who may choose to become mothers or head of families. And if they're into the STEM professions, it is also more likely that they will pay more attention, that there might be better educational outcomes. So I think that it might be whether to include probably that dimension also into what you already have there.
Great, thank you. Great, thank you. Oh, hi, sorry. Thank you so much. And actually, that was definitely something that actually has come up in the work we've done about STEM outreach and STEM opportunities, and something that we've been discussing. So it's really helpful to that reiterated to demonstrate what that was. Sorry. Okay.
Thank you very much. I'm Noemi Fakes. I work for the International Labour Organization. And I think it's really important to have a specific objective for gender and, gender inclusion, because some of the states you're targeting presents really low participation levels for women. And we work specifically in Chiapas, which is a state in the south of Mexico. And we saw that women are not participating in the labor market because of the lack of a care economy, because they have nowhere to leave their children or like familiars they're caring for. So I think this will be a social problem that the project has to, I don't know if to solve, to have an indicator for it, but the project should understand fully this problem. And one of the ideas I had right now was maybe for the states that are more in the south, maybe I think Oaxaca or Veracruz, or if you want to work in Chiapas or another one, maybe it will be good to focus on value chains that have to do with the agricultural sector, because a great part of the labor market or people live in rural areas. So I saw that the impact or the objective of the overall project is inclusive economic growth, and I think it's especially important to look at the agricultural sector as well. And universities at the state level, they have like curriculums that are targeting the agricultural sector, but women are not participating so often, and I think one of the problem is the lack of a care economy. And I think it would be great to focus maybe on the agricultural sector, because one of the priority of the new government is to invest in agricultural sector and in rural areas. So I think this will be especially important to have this partnership now with the new government. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Hey. Yep. Yeah.
Thank you. In 2018, we deployed our first workforce development program, completely gender focused, in a partnership with PepsiCo Foundation, a 2.6 million program in the state of Jalisco. It was a program designed since the beginning, since its inception, completely genderized.
Yeah.
We conducted a planning grant before to understand some of the issues you were outlining that are important to consider in a workforce program. We are happy to share our findings. We found that sometimes the barrier that impede a young woman to connect with an opportunity on the labor market in the formal sector and with a competitive salary, sometimes is the poor pedagogy of teachers in STEM subjects. Sometimes it's lack of information. They tend to enroll in programs that simply are not demanded by the labor market. Sometimes it's infrastructure, the lack of wraparound services, as Noemi mentioned, but also the employers do not have bathrooms for women. And that's the barrier that it's impeding that young lady in order to connect with the future. So we're happy to share our findings. We're trying to work specifically with IT, logistics, and hospitality in the metropolitan area of Guadalajara to try to connect young women with these high-paying jobs.
Great. Thank you so much. That's really helpful. And yes, we would be very keen to see those findings. This one here.
Question over here.
Ooh.
On this table.
Ooh.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Ernesto Treviño. I work for UN Women Mexico. I'm national officer, and I coordinate the second chance education program and vocational learning here in Mexico. Thank you very much for your presentation and for all the information that you have been giving us. I think it's very clear and it's very relevant for the current context in Mexico. The program, Second Chance Education, the one I coordinate, is very similar to this program. It has lots of outcomes that are very similar to this. It has to do with creating value educational resources for women that have, for some reason, have to abandon school. So it's focused on women and it's focused on school dropout, but it has a lot of similar issues. One of the things that I think is more important here is the fact that you're including the idea of transformation, the third part of your pyramid. I think that's the highest goal you can reach. I think that's the most complex you can reach, but I think it's very interesting. We have it as one of our 4 outcomes, one of our core outcomes. One of it has to do with eliminating and eradicating discrimination and cultural bias against women. So that's, I think, one of the most complex results that we have, and I think that it's very good that you have it there too. I celebrate, regarding the gender and social inclusion elements, I celebrate the idea of disaggregation, the idea of integrating gender analysis, and the idea of gender training also. If you're asking if these seem appropriate, they absolutely seem appropriate. All of the elements, I think they are absolutely appropriate. What are other alternative options? I think that 2 of them have already been mentioned. One is focusing on STEM. That's definitely one of the alternative options that are also relevant for the program. The second would be also something that was mentioned. You're going to confront the lack of a national care policy. That's going to be one of the biggest challenges you're going to confront, and that would be another element that would have to be added. You're going to see that most of the women that would like to participate in the program have a very strong responsibility in the care economy, and they are not able to so you're going to have to find solutions for this and ways for them to participate in the program and not leave their care responsibilities, or find another way for the state to take the care of these responsibilities. This is something that's very complex, and it's a national challenge. And we would be very glad to maybe create synergies in focusing on this challenge of the creation of a national care system, which will be one of your main challenges, and maybe we can do a synergy in working this with government. So that's one. And the third one that has not been mentioned, and I think is another challenge that you will also have to confront, and it's a very important one, is that we have evidence enough to see that when there's economic empowerment of women in some regions, these regions sometimes elevate their level of violence against women. So working with men is also very important when focusing on gender, working with the communities and trying to prevent violence in the communities is also very important, because economic empowerment of women can detonate this toxic dynamics in the communities and in the families, in the households. So that's also, I think, another important element. Yeah, basically that's it. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I've been furiously noting down what you've been